Hello, everyone. I'm Brittany with Frog God Games, and today we are interviewing Bill Kenower, author of Heart of St. Bathus. So, jumping right in, what can you tell us about the Heart of St. Bathus?
I can tell you it's awesome. Aside from that, I can tell you it is an Underdark adventure. The party, whatever their makeup may be, are either hired, conscripted, or maybe out of the goodness of their own heart, have to go into the Underdark to retrieve an item. It's a simple heart locket that belonged to a paladin whose body has not deteriorated in many centuries and is lying in state. They feel his soul needs to be freed. Anyway, it's connected to this heart. So the party is sent into the Underdark to find the monk who absconded with it. So once there, they have a lot they have to do. They have to find him, find out why he took it, and then about the force, I will not get into here because I don't want to spoil anything, why it drew this monk and this thing to it, why it needed this heart and what it wanted to do with it. So so the thing about the stuff I write for Frog God Games, or I've written for Frog God Games, and I wrote for Necromancer Games before, which was Frog God Games' initial iteration back 20 years ago, I guess. I like to write adventures that are also campaign settings. In other words, there's the thing that they're going to do, the sort of story arc of this adventure. But then I also always like to detail the area as if it was just a setting unto itself. The way the Sword Coast is in TSR world, or I think the Lost Lands is what Bill calls the world of Frog God Games.
Yes.
In this case, it's the Underdark. That is the setting where most of it takes place. And so while the adventure goes through the Underdark, I also tried to detail in such a way so that the party wanted to go back. There was still stuff happening. There are factions contending with each other that has nothing to do with the adventure, but the party might get caught up in it otherwise. I don't like the world to feel like it exists in a kind of tunnel that the adventure is taking place in. I want the whole thing to feel like it's active and they just happen to be having this adventure through it. So it is both an adventure and in that way a campaign setting. So if the DM wanted to set other adventures there, they could conceivably do that.
Okay. So when you say it's kind of like a sandbox world,
it is a little bit, yeah. I mean, unlike a true sandbox, for those of you not familiar with that vernacular, sandbox, the idea is that there's no prescribed adventure. There's just a bunch of cool stuff the players can do, which is my favorite way to run things. But there is an adventure, a person who took a amulet who needs to be found before bad stuff happens. But in addition to that, there's all kinds of other stuff in the Underdark that players could run into, could encounter, that is there and active, and the forces, the Drow, the Durgar, the Mind Flayers, the Dragons, the Kuo Dao, all the various Underdark regulars are there doing their thing, and the players will, or the characters will invariably have to deal with them. And my hope is it will feel more alive and kind of real, in the sense that it doesn't care about the adventure necessarily. They've all got their own stuff they got to take care of. And so when the party deals with them, there isn't a sense like everything is just set up to be encountered for that adventure, but it's just a living place that they're adventuring through.
There's more realism.
In that way. Yeah. And what I did do though is some of the encounter areas are in specific areas. And there are some which are most are hostile, but some are not so hostile. So you have a variety of things. But there are also encounter areas that are not placed somewhere. So the DM could say, I need that old ruined, crypt here in front of my players so that I can, because they know that they need an encounter here. So some are flexible and some are set. So the DM has a lot of options in how they run it.
So this is very much a creative DM sort of game.
Totally.
Really lets them run with it.
Totally. I am a full believer in the DM should make it their own. Like, I wrote this thing, I try to detail it as best I can so the DM knows what's going on and can make sense of it, but you should change it to suit your needs. And I should also say, and I didn't intend this when I wrote it, but in retrospect, I realize it is this way. It's a flexible kind of adventure in that if you want to run a role-playing heavy adventure, for instance, which I suspect Frog God Games does not attract, but sometimes you never know. You never know. It's a little more old school. But if you're into that, well, the Underdark is such that you don't need to fight your way through it. You can easily, there can be the people in the Underdark, and I actually preface this in the adventure saying they don't just always want to fight each other. They've got to negotiate and trade and deal with each other. And they would probably deal with the players the same way, the characters the same way if they wanted to. The beginning of the adventure, there's definitely role playing at the beginning in terms of dealing with this odd, highly religious village that has been stolen from. So you have to navigate their weird expectations for behavior and speech and all this kind of stuff. Had some fun with that. So if you want to role play, you can role play. You can also treat the Underdark, which I love. I have always been a fan of the Underdark, like a giant dungeon crawl if you want, because that's essentially what the Underdark is. It's just these tunnels and caverns and cities beneath the world. And you could treat it like a giant. So if you just want a dungeon crawl, then dungeon crawl it. And if you're into mystery, because there is a mystery, why did he take it? Where's he going? Where is he now? You got to find him. It's kind of a needle in a haystack, but there are clues. So there's clues and there's mystery. You can highlight that as well. And it's up to the DM how much what part they want to focus on, depending on what they like and depending on what their players like. So it is pretty flexible in that way. I didn't intend it, but that's actually what I ended up creating in my opinion. But it is all there. You could definitely focus on all three of those aspects or focus more on one than the other.
See, I like that in a story, and in an adventure type game, I don't like when it's too linear or there's too much story.
Yes.
This does kind of remind me a little bit of the recently released Elden Ring video game, but like in the sense that there's a lot you can use with it, and there's a lot of lore pieces kind of just floating about, and you really get to create your own story. So I really like that.
I will tell you when I played in the dark ages of multiplayer online role-playing games, and I never really played those, but I played one when it was text only, like an early version of America Online. They had it. And so it was total sandbox. And I thought, this is pretty awesome. And I think I got to bring this to the world of published adventures. I mean, there was just a certain aspect of freedom that I didn't like. Because here's the thing. If I'm designing an adventure for you, I'm like, hey, you want to play my game? Okay, well, I got a life. And so if I don't use a module, I have to design it. And basically, if I design an adventure where you go and rescue the miller's daughter, and you don't want to rescue the miller's daughter, then we're not playing. Like, there's nothing to do. So you got to go after the miller's daughter. And so ideally, I was like, well, I want to get around that. And one of the nice things about designing adventures is I have the time to create a variety of things the players can do, so they can say, well, what appeals to us the most? Like, or the DM can say, what do they like to do the most? Like, what can I send them towards that I know excites them? Because if you feel like, well, I got no choice, we got to go do this thing. If we don't go do this thing, we're not doing anything. So here we want, and the main thing we want is to play. So I do think you, as a DM, you balance this need for story with also a need for the players to feel like, I don't want to just think I'm on a train chugging along to the next encounter. It doesn't matter what I do. Because that just to me, that's frustrating and boring.
Yeah. And it's a good balance to have in any type of game, but especially RPGs. You need to have that balance between there's a purpose to why you're here, but also you can do things outside of that purpose. And
it occurs to me, I thought about this with like the first time I ever played D&D. And the first time, by the way, I played D&D because my father saw Gary Gygax explaining it at a convention in the 70s. And he was like, my kids might like that. So he brought so I started at ground zero.
Oh, wow.
And it, like, really, like, what is this? I'd never heard. The same year I read The Hobbit, this got introduced to me. So I was lost. I was a lost cause to fantasy, all things fantasy for a few years. But the thing, the classic early style dungeon, I remember we came down these stairs and there was a room and there were 3 doors in it. And the reason I loved that moment is I knew the dungeon master, my father in this case, he didn't know which door we're going to take. Now, he built that room and drew it out and drew the doors, and he knew what was behind all the doors, but he didn't know which one we were going to go to. So in that moment, we knew, whether we were conscious of it or not, we were choosing where this adventure was going because we got to choose the door. And if
Yeah.
you any of you DMs, the one mistake you never want to make is deciding, I know what my players are going to do when I put this bridge or this, they're not going to do it. They're going to
Nope.
do something you didn't predict. And that's the why I particularly love dungeons, because you can design it, but then unless it's a purely linear dungeon, which most aren't, then you see what they do and you just never know which are they going to go east or west, and which way they go determines the flow of the adventure.
So what inspired this adventure? Because I don't know, I'm stuck on the mystery aspect of it. I love mysteries. And
Do
so,
you?
oh yeah.
Are you
Oh
a
yeah.
reader? Do you like reading books? Are you a book reader? Yeah.
I
And do you
read
read
all
like
the
mysteries or like science fiction mysteries?
a little bit of both. I
Yeah.
primarily the most mystery like genre that I've read is the Nancy Drew series.
Oh my God. Yes. While you were
Yep,
reading Nancy Drew, the first thing I read before Hobbit and Lord of the Rings was the boy version, which is the
the
Hardy Boy.
Hardy
I
Boys.
devoured those. And then I read The Hobbit and I was like, well, this is something altogether different. So you like the mystery aspect. Well, so here's the interesting
Yeah.
thing. I wrote 2 adventures for Bill Webb, who is the creator of Frog God Games. And this was back in the day, so to speak, back in the world of 3E and 3.5. And they were both big campaign books. And I said, Bill said, write me another one. I said, you bet. It's going to be about the Underdark. And then I didn't write it. Like I started writing other things. I got distracted. But when he came back to write another one for me, I said, okay, I'm going to write that Underdark adventure. So all I knew is I really wanted to write about the Underdark. I love the Underdark. I thought it was a great setting. It's just where all my campaigns end up there at some point. But I said, well, why are they there? This is the interesting thing about creativity. Why are the players going there? I wanted a reason. And next thing I knew, and actually I read Bill's voluminous encyclopedic description of the Lost Lands, which included a description of the Templars and their crusades. And so I kind of use that. So it's technically, if you want to place it in the Lost Lands, it is historically connected to that land. I just use it as inspiration. But I said to myself, why would they go there? Who's there? What's the problem? And I started thinking, and I came up with this character named Saint Bathus, this Templar who's made some poor choices in his life and has led to a problem. And this is the way creativity works, by the way. So one of the things I do is I'm a creativity coach, and I teach creativity, and I go around the country and talk about creativity. And it's about questions. As a creative person, you want to ask a question you're really interested in answering. So I was like, well, why are they going? And I really didn't want a plot, but I came up with a plot. So there's a backstory, but I wrote it as quickly and concisely as possible so the DM can just hold it in their head. So they don't have to feel like they're reading a whole history that's quickly compact for why this adventure is there. And it ended up having a nice mysterious aspect to it, which I think if the players are into it is cool as the pieces begin to unfold. Yeah.
Yeah. I like that you approach it the way writers approach things
Yeah.
in like traditional storytelling, because my sister's an author and I've helped her with her books, and that's how we always attack any sort of story that she's working on. Is we answer all the questions first. We find a question and then we just follow it. And I love seeing that in RPGs because it just creates such a vast and interesting world, which I'm really getting from this.
Oh, absolutely. And I love designing dungeons. And the thing is, what I do is I say, well, what's behind this door? What's behind this door? I don't know. I'll start drawing. I say, I think there's a cave here. Well, what's there? What should it feel like? What do I want it to feel like? What does this place need that's different than what came before? And so I always think in terms of what's here, what's here, what's here. I don't know what's here. Let me discover what would be cool here. What would be cool here? And sometimes when I learn what's there, then it gives me more ideas, and then it gives me more ideas, and then it gives me more. Here's something interesting. So I interview authors, some of them like mystery writers, like traditional whodunit type crime writers. It is not unusual for crime writers. It's true, people. This is true. I wouldn't lie to you. To say, I have a body. Martha Grimes is one author, if you're familiar with her. She puts a body down. She doesn't know who killed it. She just starts writing, and then she finds out. And a lot of times she finds out sort of when the reader finds out. Does that make sense? So they don't plan it out. Some do, but a lot of them don't plan it out ahead of time. They just kill somebody and then say, well, let's see who killed it. And they just start writing. And then they find out as they go. The mysteries of the muse.
And that sounds so fun.
It
for
is.
planning out your stories like that, just following the way the questions lead you and the natural path it goes through.
And by the way, so I was running a game. I'm running my own game once, and I had this I had the players. They found this Underdark halfling. Essentially, I created a race of Underdark, kind of semi-evil Underdark halflings. She was a princess from this Underdark. So I said, okay, what I want them to have to return her, and they'll receive a reward. And I thought, oh, it'll be funny. The reward will be her sister who will hate them. So it'll be just this big catastrophe. And so that was my plan. But my players, as they were saying, okay, we'll do this but we know how this is going to go, they kept saying, what's going to actually happen is we're going to bring her back, and they're not going to want her. They're going to have already taken over for her. They're going to have betrayed her. And I thought, that's better. And so they said, oh, we knew it when that finally happened, but they didn't know. I took that idea from them as they were sitting there theorizing about how it was going to go. I often will change the plot as they begin thinking about where it's going and go, oh, that's even better. And so I'll shift it based on what they're saying. And they think they predicted it.
And you're like, yes, you picked up on all the
you were
small clues.
you know me so well.
Yes, of course. So how is being an author and someone who's in the writing scene and, tells stories a lot, how has that influenced how you created this one?
It's interesting. I think my background as a writer does help. I mean, I just in terms of my ability to describe passages, but I know as both a writer and a DM, I don't want anything very fancy, and I want them to be as quick and to the point as possible so I can just play. But I think that I have learned to appreciate how little story you want for the adventure to work. And I love story. I teach storytelling. I believe in storytelling. But in D&D, you want, I think, as little, even though there's a big backstory to this, what actually will unfold is not planned. Basically, the person they're chasing is a certain place, and they've got to, how they find it, it's up to them. And then what happens is largely unscripted. Right? There is no first chapter, second chapter, third chapter, the way some published mod. Nothing wrong with that. Like, that works. But I really didn't want to decide what the story was. I wanted it to unfold as the players discover things. And as the DM starts saying, ooh, I know what would make a good next stage. And so I think it actually helped me appreciate the importance of improvisation to the kind of storytelling that happened, the collaborative storytelling that is D&D, the storytelling that happens within a combat sometimes. When a die is cast and nobody knows what's going to happen, and that die determines some outcome, and the story then turns based on that outcome, we all got to be able to, shift with it. And as a writer, the thing you do not want to do is think you know what your story is before you tell it. You want to be surprised as you tell it. Well, I want to be surprised by what happens in the game. So I think in that way, my background as an author actually made me less controlling about the way, and hopefully created an environment that allowed for the maximum amount of creativity from the players and the DM, if that makes sense. Because it just, you want to respond to what's happening and what happened, and have the game react to the events that I can't plan. I don't know what your players are going to do. I don't know how the dice are going to go. And that has to be more important than what I think than the X, Y, and Z of how I think things are going to go. And I specifically did not design it so you're going to do this, and then that, and then this, and then that. I wanted to let it happen organically for the player. I hope they are able to roll with that a little bit. But that's where I think the fun is for me as a DM and as a player.
You kind of wrote it the way, like, authors describe their characters writing themselves.
Oh, totally. That's how you do it.
And I love that. Yeah.
Yeah. Brittany was referring to something which, if you've ever written fiction or listened to fiction authors talk, it's absolutely true. Woe betide the author who says, oh, I want my character to be single. And then it turns out, no, she's been married for 20 years. And you go, no, I don't want you to be married. She's married. She's like, I really love this guy or her or whatever. And so characters will tell you what they want to be. I know it sounds strange because you're alone, but that's the way it works. That is the way it works. And I write about my own life primarily. And I'm still surprised by what happens. Even though I'm telling stories about things that happened to me, I still surprise myself with how it unfolds. The surprise is everything. And I don't want to play a game if I know how it's going to go. I want to be surprised by what the players do, by how things unfold, by who lives and dies. I want the surprise. That's where the fun is.
And isn't that the essence of D&D? Just going on an adventure with your friends, not
Hey,
even knowing where it's going to end up.
listen, see, this is the thing, because you've been raised where there's only D&D has always existed. When I discovered it, I'm 12 years old, and I loved games. My father was a gamer. He invented games. He tried to sell games. He went to gaming conventions to compete. I mean, it was before gamers existed. He was a gamer. So we were raised, we played football, we played wiffle ball, we played basketball, we played D&D. I saw no difference between all these things except for one thing. And this to me is the profound philosophical thing about D&D. There are no winners and losers. The only point to the game is to have fun. There are objectives, but you can not meet an objective. In other words, you could try to rescue someone and it could all go sideways. You still have fun. Everybody wins. It is every other game in the world that has ever been created. Someone wins and loses. You need a structure, right? You need some reason. You're not just tossing a ball to each other or just moving pieces. There's a winner and loser. Not in D&D. There is no winner and loser, not in role-playing games, let's say. And I think it's profound. I think that it's an interesting way to look at being with other people, where the whole point is, did we have fun? If I had fun and the DM, then we all had fun, and it was a win, but nothing was gained. No one was better than anybody else. I love it. That's why I think as a way of gathering together, it's so uplifting, because nobody comes away lesser than. No one has to deal with not getting something. That makes sense?
That makes sense. Instead of it's us against them, it's us against everything else.
That's right. It's us collaboratively solving a problem, whether it's 6 trolls or the chest that we have to open or the bridge we have to get across or the prince we have to rescue, whatever it is. It's collaborative storytelling. It's collaborative problem solving, I think of it. And I think it's so we're all teammates. There is no other team. There's no other team. We're not divided into us and them. There's the monsters, but they're well, to get psychological, they're an extension of our egos, I think. And so we're trying to kill them. But there is no other, but as soon as you create teams, then you want to beat the other guy. Maybe you care about it more or less, but that's the psychology we get into. So to me, it was a beautiful thing, because while I love games and I can be competitive, I don't want, the winning and losing is not the fun part. It's the working, it's having teammates. It's being together with somebody that's really the fun part. And D&D, just the camaraderie. Yeah, I always thought adventure, exploration, and camaraderie, that's the fun of D&D.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Oh, totally.
And did you say your father, so before D&D was a thing, he was a game creator?
Oh, game. He designed a game called Campaign, which was the simulation of the U.S. campaign, of a U.S. presidential campaign. He made it. He tried to sell it. He took it to the 1964 presidential Democratic convention, and it became a whole thing. He didn't flourish, but he so loved games, he was making them already. And so I was just raised. I mean, one of my earliest memories of him playing a simulation of World War I with his friend at our card table in our living room. And so games had just been a part of my life before I could remember anything. But D&D was a different kind of game. And I just thought, this is a good game. This is the kind of game, because it also involves storytelling, which was a big thing for me. I was a voracious reader, and I knew I wanted to be a writer at that point also. So it seemed, and I was into theater. I've done theater, and so it blended that element of my life as well. So it seemed like a great fit for all those things.
Yeah, that sounds actually like you were almost designed for D&D.
I was like designing a lab to be a DM.
We'll put theater interest, writing interest, and then also just creativity everywhere.
That's right. And just love of games. So you got to like all of it. I can read rules and enjoy doing so. I think it's fun.
I love that. Well, is there anything that we haven't touched on so far that you wanted to mention or tell the audience?
Well, I love the Underdark because it's a dangerous place. And one of my complaints about when I started, I have almost never run a designed adventure. I always just design my own. And sometimes I will pillage things from other people's and I'll borrow it, but I always just design my stuff. But I found them to be, I want my players to have a sense of danger. And I feel like without the sense of danger, it gets kind of boring. And it's tough because you can't make it too dangerous or that can get boring because they just all die. And there needs to be some sense of like, there's something more powerful than me somewhere that I could run into. And one of the problems with the above ground is, especially if you play Dungeons and Dragons, 5e version Dungeons and Dragons, as the players get to be higher level, which they do relatively quickly the way they've designed it. If you're 8th or 9th level, the only thing you can really fight, you have to fight dragons and giants and demons, and they're just not going to be stomping around the world of peasants and farmers and millers. And so it doesn't really make sense. You have to do all these kinds of machinations as to why these really terrifying creatures are available for you to encounter. But the Underdark, in my mind, they all live there. Like that's their place. And so it would make perfect sense to run into a purple worm or a hydra or a squadron of drow or whatever. And so there is no logical dissonance to why these threats would exist. And you're the stranger there. The players, the characters, the dwarves and the halflings and the elves and the humans are not going to be, they're the other. They're the foreigners in a strange land. And I think that makes it dangerous too. And I think that the Underdark is a great way to keep the players on edge, keep them not feeling safe, make them worry about resting, because in D&D, 5e especially, they always want to rest so they can get all their spells back and all their hit points back. So the Underdark is a great way to keep them on edge, keep them worried for their safety, keep them wishing they could get above ground. I remember when I run my old grizzled, experienced, gnarly, jaded party through the Underdark, when they get out, they go, God, I'm glad I'm out of that horrible place. I'm like, yes, success. They're glad they left it. That means that's a good adventure. They're glad it's over in that way, right? It was tough. It was challenging. And it gets tough to challenge players, especially if they're like my friends. They've been playing forever, so they've seen a lot of stuff. It's harder to surprise them. If they're new players, it's easier. But eventually you start figuring a few things out. You understand the tropes, and you maybe get less surprised. But the Underdark, threats are everywhere. Threats are everywhere. And that's what you want. You don't want them just knocking down every door thinking, well, it'll be a level appropriate encounter. I'm not really worried about it. No, keep them worried. Keep them scared. And the Underdark is a great place to keep them running occasionally.
I love it.
So what do they do? So right now, we're going into Kickstarter mode with this. Is this what's happened? Is this where the
Yes, we are currently having launched the Kickstarter. We want people to support this project, get to know about this project. And I think that honestly, if you don't support this project, you're boring. No,
you're nuts. You're crazy.
Because this sounds like a wonderful time. I think I'm gonna back it.
Good.
You've convinced me.
Oh, good.
But if people watching this, our audience, if y'all are like, man, I really love this project, I can't back it, just share this video, share the project, post it everywhere you can on social media, and let people know about it, because this is a really cool project.
Well, it's been great chatting with you, Brittany, and to all of you out there. Do it. You play your game, baby. You play your game. You run, and I would be honored if this little adventure was a part of your game. That would be awesome for me. Share your stories. WilliamKenower.com. You can go to my website if you want to share some of your stories of running. I'd love to hear from you. If not, just tell people at Frog God Games where it'll get to me. Love it. Play your game, baby. Play your game.
Play your game. And thank you for watching, and we will all see you next time. Bye.
Bye.